Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our best practices for utilizing on-campus interview schedules in the GradLeaders Career Center webinar. I'm Tammy Scott, VP of Support. I will get our session kicked off today. In just a few short minutes, I will hand this off to Dave Hoy, our Business Intelligence Specialist and overall system expert, to conduct the training segment. Here's the agenda for our session today. Oops. Following this overview, we will get right into the demo training session. The on-campus interview module manages interview scheduling, creating a seamless automated process for employers and students. Employers can submit requests, reserve rooms, review, and invite students to interview. Students apply for interviews and also have the option to swap times if that's offered by your school. Admins approve requests, set up visits, and are able to oversee the entire process. Just some quick housekeeping before we begin. If you have questions, please type them in the chat window, not the Q&A window. I know how confusing that is. We will monitor the questions and answer them at the end. Before we end, at the very end of the webinar, I'll also post some reminders that are things that are coming up. Here's our agenda. During this session, we'll be going through the process in order, showing from the admin, employer, and student perspective. Here's the detailed list of topics as they will be presented. So basic setup from the admin perspective, then into the employer for room reservations and requests, back to admin to approve requests and availability, and then back to employer to complete job description. Also part of our agenda, we'll show it from the student perspective, applying for interviews, employers review applicants and pre-select, students responding to invites, picking times, swapping times, admins reviewing, overseeing everything, and then viewing and printing schedules. Dave will also end with a few optional options: multi-job interview visits, bidding, first come, first serve open interviews, and automated fill schedule. So now I'm going to pass this over to Dave to do a live training session of the on-campus interview module.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Tammy. I'm going to take a moment here and get into my browser so that you can see what it is we're talking about. You were looking at a demo site branded, generically State University. You all have your own sites, obviously, so you're familiar with that concept. As Tammy said, I'm just going to go sort of beginning to end in the business process around the on-campus interviews module. It can be really simple and straightforward, from sort of just the vanilla on-campus interviews where students apply, employers pre-select or invite their interviewees, and students pick times. It can be just that simple. It can also be incredibly robust and complex. We have schools everywhere in the spectrum, from very simple to very complex and everything in between. And we've got the configuration options needed to try to match your business process. A couple of those optional modules that Tammy mentioned, I'm just going to work into this standard demo. That would be the room reservations and the employer requests. As she mentioned, the bidding and the automated scheduler I'll show you at the end just via PowerPoint, because those are something that apply to very few schools. It's not part of our standard implementation, but I want to just make everybody aware that those are there. So before we start in the business process, there's a handful of setup things you need to utilize and get ready to make this module work. We're going to look at a few things, and I'm going to start with the concept of what we call rounds. An interview round, again, as you know, in our system, it's flexible, it's renamable. Schools call these all different things. They call them interview weeks. They call them interview cycles. Some call them academic terms like semester or quarter. What is a round? It really is nothing more than a series of default dates and deadlines for the trigger actions that need to happen around the on-campus interview process. So you can see we've got a number of rounds here in this demo site. I've set up one for today's webinar that we'll just take a look at and sort of describe what a round does. When you create a new interview visit or interview date, in the system, you have to assign it to a round. And the round, as I said, you give it a name. Obviously, you make it active if it's appropriate. You turn them inactive when they get older. You assign the start and end date for that round. In this case, you can see it's sort of a winter-spring 2019 round based on those dates. And then you're defining the defaults. When do you want the job descriptions to be due? You can see there is just a number of business days before the interview date. So as you set up the rounds, you can just sort of define the default process you want most of your interview visits to go through. Now, there is a second type of round. Again, in this demo site, we've chosen what is most standard, and this is the way most schools do it. They just sort of have rolling deadlines based on the interview dates. We do have schools that have a more sort of rigid on-campus process, so if you need to have fixed calendar rounds, you can do that. What would change on this screen is that instead of it saying blank number of business days prior to the interview date, you would actually have an explicit date field where you would say, all of the job descriptions are due January 10th, 2019. All of the student applications are due February 12th of 2019. So you're picking explicit dates for each trigger date and deadline in the round. Again, the only schools that use that are schools that have very high volume weeks where they might have 100 companies or more on campus in a given week or 2 week period, and they'll set up strict fixed deadlines for those rounds. Another important thing to set up are schedule templates. Schedule templates are exactly what they sound like. I'll just click into one here and show it to you. Basically, you're just defining some schedules that you use most commonly on campus for your normal interview schedules. In this case, it's a 20-minute interview starting at 8 o'clock. You can see some breaks are worked in there. So it's pretty easy to set up these templates. Give them clear names that are going to make sense to you and to your employers. Those templates that you set up that you want employers to be able to choose from, make sure you check the box and say, yes, employers can see and select this one. We have many schools that will set up, let's say they set up 10 different templates, but they really want to try to funnel the employers into 3 or 4 key templates. So they'll just make those 3 or 4 visible to employers as they make their reservations. Another important thing to set up is if you're going to use our room reservations module, which is relatively new in GradLeaders Career Center, let's just talk about these room reservation settings for a moment. Again, this module, many schools aren't using it, and you might ask, well, why would I use room reservations? You really only need to use room reservations module if you're charging for the rooms, charging the employer some fee to use your interview rooms, and you want them to have an approved reservation before they get an on-campus interview date. So we'll just touch on this briefly today in the demo, but just know that this module is here. And there's a couple of concepts here that are worth understanding. Of course, you can put some settings in for your room reservation module. You can set up the various fee items that you might be charging for, and then you can define a list of valid dates. When can employers reserve a room? You can see there's a couple of different starting and ending periods there where you can define the dates where they can pick rooms. So getting that set up ahead of time using the room reservations is important. There are a couple other really basic and simple setup things here that I won't go into. One of them is the room list, which I think you're all familiar with. If you're using any of the modules for on-campus interviews, advising, workshops, etc., all of those utilize the room list. So it really is just getting your interview rooms into the room list. And then finally, valid dates. We've sort of talked about that already with the room reservations. But again, you can set up date ranges where it's okay for employers to request coming on campus. All right, so that is a lot of the sort of background setup you need to do to use the on-campus interview module. I'm going to get signed in as an employer now, and we're going to start the business process flow. Typically, most of our schools are using the on-campus request process, so that usually kicks off the flow. I'm going to be Sam from Walmart here and get logged in. So as the recruiter module loads, again, let's just talk about the process. Generally speaking, the employer kicks it off by sort of raising their hand via the system and saying, I'd like to come on campus and interview your students. We call that an on-campus request. And then from there, you pick up the ball, and it's your job to approve or decline that request. So let's just walk through that. And that may or may not include room reservations if you're using that module. I just want to show this to you to make sure that you've seen it. So in the room reservations module for employers, you can see, oh, this employer already has one that's been approved, one that's been declined, and I could go look at those things if I wanted to. But what I really want to do today is I want to make a new room reservation request for my on-campus interview. So you can see I get this calendar interface, and it's looking through those available dates, the valid dates we set up, and saying, well, when would you like to reserve your room? Well, let's just pick something here that New Year's Eve, I'll come on campus. I'm sure I'll get a great attendance with that. So the employer is simply saying, how many rooms do you want? What dates do you want them? You can see it's picking up the fees here. How are you going to pay for this? If I were to choose credit card, it would walk me through exactly what you would expect to see as you're buying something online. It takes you through the credit card process. If you're using our online credit card services, all of that gets handled for you. In this case, just to keep it simple, I'm going to say I'll pay by check and save my request. So at this point, I've made a request that you could see in your view administratively, and it's showing me now as the employer, it's showing me, well, here's your invoice. I could go ahead and print that out or take the PDF and send it to my accounting department, whatever I need to do to get that thing paid. So the room reservation process, pretty simple for the employers, but I just wanted to show you that. Now let's just go ahead and get ready to make our on-campus request too, now that we're here in the employer module. You can see they've got, again, a similar interface. They've got a couple of outstanding requests already made here on the demo site, a handful already confirmed and declined and so forth. But let's just make our new interview request now. Again, this is the same request process they would go through if they were going to come to one of your career fairs or have some other type of company event, an info session, what have you. But for now, I'm just going to fill out a request to come do full-time interviews. This is just another form in the system. I'm sure you're familiar with the job posting forms, the student profile forms, et cetera. Another flexible form where you can get the questions configured to your needs so that you're gathering the right information. There's a little pop-up there that would show the employer the valid dates for interviews if they needed to double-check those. But then at this point, they're really just filling out a form. Is this going to be for multiple jobs, or are you interviewing for just one job? We'll just keep this simple and say interviewing for an associate position. And then, again, I'll just sort of breeze through this, filling out the required fields. But just bear in mind that you can control the questions and answers on this form. Best practices, some schools like to let the employers get through the request as quickly as possible. They don't necessarily prompt for job descriptions and full job function lists and everything here. They're just trying to get the request settled, and then they can let the employer come in and do the job descriptions later. Other schools put every bit of information on the job on this request form. You can choose how you want to handle that. And you can see here I'm picking through the interview templates. Let's say I want to do 30-minute interviews. Do I want the interview request? And you'll see, again, schools use different words for this, an interview request or a resume drop or an application, whatever words you want to use for that. So this is the system asking the employer, how do you want your applications to come in? Do you want to get them through the system? Do you also want to get them via company website or through an email, et cetera, cover letter? So this form, you can see it's got job description and a number of fields there as well on the job. But the really key piece of info here is what date do you want to come on campus? I'll go ahead and say the 31st, even though that doesn't make sense. And there, I'll just submit my form. So that's the employer sort of kicking off the process here by filling out a request to come on campus and do the interviews. Now they're sitting there waiting for you to act on their request. Let's go back to the admin view here. The first thing I'll show you then is just, let's just let you deal with that room reservation request that came in. You can see we've got a handful here that have come in. I'll just, here's my 1231 request for 2 rooms. You can see them there. It gives you the ability to record when they give you a payment. And mark it as paid. So you've got that. Oh, sorry. Pick the method. So you've got the ability to record payments if they're not using credit cards. You've got the ability, you saw the checkbox there, to waive the fee if you're so inclined for a particular company. That's fine also. And then you can simply approve these room reservations so that the employer's aware, and that room reservation could now be used for interviews. Again, let's go back to the normal flow though. So let's look at these on-campus requests. Many of you are probably familiar with this screen. This is where you'll see the inbound requests for not only interviews, career fairs, other types of company events, etc. And we're just going to take this Walmart request that just came in and have a look at that. As you deal with these requests, you can obviously take a number of actions, including editing the request directly and changing something on behalf of the employer. Obviously, confirm and decline are the two primary actions here. If something's not clear, you want to clarify something, you can just shoot an email to the recruiter that filled out the form. Room availability is something that I think is underutilized by our customers a little bit. So let's take a peek at that page. The room availability screen is available there from the page where you're reviewing a request. It's also available from the menu if you've got that turned on. So you can get at it a couple of different ways. But what the room availability is trying to do is show you everything that's already scheduled in a room. And so I could be looking ahead to 12/31 to see, well, do we have availability that day? And of course we do. So as you configure your system, you tell it how many interview rooms do you have available. You can see here in the demo site we've got 20 total interview rooms available at this fictional school. On a given day here, the 14th, 17 rooms are available, 3 are in use, and it's showing you what they're in use for. So this is a module that some schools find very useful if they're having problems with overbooking during busy weeks and so forth. This tool can be invaluable to take a look at before you decide to approve a request from an employer. Okay, but we're back at the Walmart interview request now, and really, if I'm okay with everything, all I have to do is just confirm this. When you confirm it, pardon me, you can pick from one of the dates that the employer requested, or you can assign them some other date that's going to work, and let's not do that. Let's actually make it a real date here. So if we assign that to the 23rd of January, after we assign that date and confirm it, we get an email template available to us that's going to give them some of the information back as well as the date. And then most schools fill out this template with a whole lot of information about other instructions that, you know, hey, before you come on campus, do this, you know, make sure you're logging in, and et cetera. Whatever instructions you want to include there is fine in the email template. As you finish the confirmation of that request, the system takes you directly into the on-campus interview record, and you need to complete this record to sort of finalize the interview date. You can see this, and again, this is another survey where you can configure fields, but by and large, it's pulling in information about the company, and then it's pulling in all the information from the employer request that was filled out, and then you've got some other things to finish. The first most important field to finish is what round is this a part of? Remember, we set up the round a few moments ago. So I'm going to say, well, this is part of my webinar round. And then what that did is it's taking the interview date that was specified, and it's filling in a bunch of trigger dates and deadlines here based on the round settings. Now, once you have pulled in the round, you have the ability to customize these dates on a company-by-company, interview-by-interview basis. Obviously, nobody's going to have an invitation or pre-select deadline date on Christmas, so you could tweak these dates as you see fit on an interview-by-interview basis. But again, you're just sort of coming through here, filling out the important fields, changing whatever you feel like needs to be changed. And I'm just going to take a quick peek here and see if there's any other required fields that I need to complete. Work authorization is something that wasn't on the request form. There's other job-related fields here. So fill out, and again, you can control. A lot of schools leave this form on the administrative side. They typically leave all of the job-related fields as not required. Because that's kind of the employer's job. So, but again, that's something you can work on in terms of how you want to have this configured. but again, the best practice is don't require things like job description, job location, et cetera. That's the employer's job. Okay, so we've filled out that, and the system takes us back to the on-campus request page so I could look at and review more on-campus requests and approve that if I needed to. But we've walked through the basic setup. Now let's go back and find our on-campus interview. And again, the word visit is our generic standard term in the system for an interview record. Schools call these all different things. I think the most common is interview visit or interview date, but I've seen them called other things as well. So, again, that's up to you. But let's take a look at these records, and let's take a look specifically at the one we just created on the 23rd here for Walmart. So what have we got now? We've got an on-campus interview visit record that has a bunch of key trigger dates and deadlines that I can see here on the main tab, a number of settings that are there, some general information about the job and the date. Lots of actions here, including edit. You could go back and edit and fix that page that we were just on a moment ago. Lots of other actions here. We'll talk about most of these today, but I really want to, for now, focus on the Schedules tab. So again, we had 2 schedules specified on the employer request. They picked the template. You can always customize these for each company as well. So let's say you're working with the employer and they chose this template and then they realize, oh, I can be on campus at 9:30. Let's go ahead and start the interviews at 10. You can do things like that where you come in and edit the schedule and change the times. And you could start over if you wanted to. If the employer said, I really meant to choose 45-minute interviews, you can just choose the Modify Schedule button and pick another template. Easy enough. That's fine. Just say Use Template, and it'll regenerate the schedule with a new template. Or you can go totally off the board and customize the schedule if you need to for some reason. If I choose Modify Schedule, instead of picking a template, well, the employer has told me they want to have 7 45-minute interviews. I'll just hit the Update Times button, and this is going to just sort of give me exactly what I asked for, 7 45-minute slots. Now, I can just manipulate the start times to do what I need to do. The employer said they'd like to start at 10. I manipulate the start time on slot 1, and it moves everything else down. Let's give them a lunch break at 12:15 after 3 interviews. We'll just give them an hour, right? So again, I'm just moving the start times, and you can see what's happening here. It's just sort of rolling the subsequent times down. So there, we built a nice schedule for this employer, and they're going to have 7 45-minute interviews. So that's how you manipulate schedules. Okay, so we've got this set up now. Now, anytime you see one of these red messages, I did that on purpose because we've now deviated from what the employer had originally requested. When we set this visit up, we told it there was going to be 2 schedules with 6 slots each, right, for 30 minutes. And now we've sort of gone off the board here. We've got 13 interviews total. So these red messages, sometimes they alarm schools, and they're typically just warnings. Nothing is really broken, but it's typically advisable to just try to resolve that, right? I could just fix this by simply removing a slot. You didn't see me use any of these little icons, but I can add a slot to the end of the day, and again, there's always a mouse over tip there. Add a slot to the beginning. Obviously, the trash can is going to remove a time slot. You can even block a time slot if you just need to hold that slot for some specific purpose, but you don't actually want to remove it from the schedule. Now, I'm in sort of a strange state here, right? I've got 6 45-minute interview schedules starting at 10, and then I've got this other one here. There are things you can do like this, right? You can just delete an entire schedule. You've got the ability to add another schedule. There is a copy schedule as well that you can use. So there's a lot of different ways for you to solve this problem. But we'll just let that go for now. So we've got the schedule set up. That's fine. And this visit is basically ready to go. And at this point, the process just sort of takes over once you've confirmed the request and set it up. And generally, it falls in exact sort of date sequence. So now, based on our defaults, the next thing that would have had to happen is the employer should finish the job description. Then there's a period of time where students can apply. Then there's a date and time when we make the resumes available to the employer through the system. They need to get you their pre-selects or invitations by a certain date. Then students, once they're invited, can start picking times for their interviews, and then finally a final deadline. So you really, at this point, you could be totally hands-off if everybody else is doing their job, right? If the employers have no problems or questions, if the students have no problems or questions, you can just sort of sit here and observe. Pardon me. But I just want to walk through each of these steps. So let's go be an employer who's going to update this job description. I'll just sign in as this recruiter. I want to make everybody aware that this is here also. This gets overlooked a lot. If I've got my friend at Walmart on the phone or sending me an email saying they're having a certain question or problem, you could always go to the recruiter file and find them and sign in as them, but there's a sign in as recruiter right here on the interview visit record, just to save you some clicks. So there, I'm now Sam from Walmart again, and I can come in and take a look at my interview and find my various interviews. I probably didn't make that one visible yet, but that's okay. So, you get this sort of interface for the employer as well, where they can come in, look at things, they can type in job descriptions and so forth, and access their information that way. There are a couple of different ways. I'm sorry, I need to refresh this and make sure that this new visit is visible to them. There it is. Now again, because of the dates we had on the round, you can see it's turning red here. I haven't done my job description on time, but once the students start applying, the employers are no longer allowed to change the job description. So I don't have my normal edit link that you would have here, but again, I won't waste your time on this webinar. But when the dates are right, the employer has the ability to just come in and edit, put in the job description, attach additional jobs, and so forth, and complete that work ideally before the deadline. Again, if you've got an employer who's not paying attention to this, you've got the ability to track this down. There are a number of process-based reports here under the on-campus menu. This one maybe is a little harshly named, delinquent closed, but this is when the closed list for their pre-selects is not finished by the deadline. There's another one here called missing job descriptions. It'll show you a list of all the interviews where the deadline has passed for job descriptions and the employer hasn't plugged it in. So you've got some reports there that are at your disposal to call out problem children and let you sort of address them so that they can meet their end of the deadlines. Okay, let's just, since again the dates are passed for employers, it's important for you to know that these dates and deadlines are there to prevent employers from doing things at the wrong time and students from doing things at the wrong time. They're not there to hinder you in any way. These deadlines do not apply to administrators. It's important to know that. And I could come in and key the job information in now. I want you to notice that there's no jobs tab here. I want to show you another interview visit where there is a jobs tab. And what does that mean? Well, if I go find one, I've got a Toyota job here that you can see. Multiple job postings, no or yes. Multi-job visits are something that particularly a lot of undergraduate schools are using heavily. I would suggest that you might find this really useful. You saw when I filled out my request as Sam Smith from Walmart, one of the first questions I had to answer yes or no was, is this going to have multiple jobs? You can see this one says yes. And then when that happens, typically all the job description and everything comes off of this page, and instead you get a new jobs tab. On the jobs tab, you can have one 2 through 20 jobs, however many you need. You can simply hit add job posting to manually key in a new job, or you can copy job postings that are already on file for this employer and just make a copy of that posting and attach a new posting to this interview visit. The employer has the exact same tools at their disposal so that they can hopefully easily get their job descriptions attached to the interview visit, so that the students can see them. So multi-job visits are very important and something good to understand. Each job then, you've got the ability to receive applicants on a job-by-job basis. You can come in and tailor screening categories on a job-by-job basis. So an employer could have a full-time job that your seniors are going to apply to, and they could have internships that your sophomores and juniors are going to apply to, and you can have different screening categories for each job on a single interview visit. Something else that gets asked a lot, now I don't have this one set up this way, but you can have multiple schedules per interview visit. Obviously, you've already seen that. They can be different dates. If this employer, for example, was bringing just one interviewer to campus and they were going to be here for 2 days, it is totally okay if schedule number 1 is on the 18th and schedule number 2 is on the 19th. The system doesn't care. It's just giving you a little note here. Again, it's in red, but don't get alarmed. Nothing's broken. It's just letting you know, hey, all of your schedules aren't the same day. But that's okay. The system will function absolutely fine like that. And if a student gets invited to schedule number 2, they'll never know the difference about the 18th. They'll just know that they've got an interview on the 19th. So multi-day visits are fine as well as multi-job visits. Okay, the next thing I want to do is get signed in as a student a little bit, and let's see what that looks like, and let's go through the apply process. I'm going to sign in as this Courtney person in the demo site. We use her record a lot. So the students, a couple of things of note. First of all, if they're just doing a regular job search, most schools are configured in a way that when I run a job search, let's say I look for a certain job location or a certain job function, whatever it is I'm looking for, I am searching not only the regular job board postings, but also the on-campus recruiting jobs. So the visits can be, and I think as a best practice, should be included in what you're showing the students on the job search page. They're just looking for jobs. They want to apply to the right job. If it happens to be on campus, that's great. When they click into that job, they'll get a little bit different view, a little bit different application process maybe, but having everything on in the Jobs tab is really important. Once they've started interacting with an on-campus interview visit, then using the Interviews tab is helpful. This is where they do their processing sort of beyond the original search. Maybe they've favorited some, maybe they've applied to some. You can see, in this case, the student Courtney has a couple of invitations, a couple of interviews already. But let's just say, okay, I want to go to apply to that Toyota one that we just saw a moment ago. Here's a Toyota in January, right? And I can see it's a multi-job on-campus interview. I get some basic information here about the interview date and the deadlines. Let's say I really want to apply to this finance division job. I'll click into it. I can, just like normal, I can see all of the job information. I can see the other jobs that are associated with this interview visit here. So I can pick from one job or the other, but when I'm ready, I'm just going to go ahead and submit or apply to this. I just pick my resume, cover letter if we need it. Had the employer specified apply by company website like this one, you can see that's here too. So it's giving the employer everything they need. Giving the student everything they need to apply to this job. So that's a student applying. That's pretty straightforward and not that different than what you see on the job board. Let's have a look then at the next step in the process, and that is typically when the employer has gone past the student application deadline and they're reviewing their applicants. Going to get back to that Toyota record. That one's further along than the one that we just requested from Walmart, so this will give us a little better insight. again, I'm just clicking into the Toyota interview visit. I'm going to use the sign in as recruiter here just because it's so much easier than going and finding the person. So here I am. I'm Emily from Toyota. I've got all of my normal things here, but there's my on-campus interview for January. Let's see what we have. I can see the main tab now. Because the date ranges are correct, you know, I can come see everybody who's applied. And I don't know if any of you have noticed, but this little grid view thing, this happens to be my preferred way to look at it. You know, you can look at a list or you can look at these cards. I like the cards so much better. And hopefully your employers and students are finding that little navigation item as well, because I think it's a much cleaner view when you just use the cards. Okay, so here's my 7 applicants. I can see I've got all of these students that applied. I can do a number of things. You know, I could print all the resumes. I could send these folks an email, et cetera. So you've got a number of actions available there. But really what I need to do for today is just start deciding who I want to. Maybe I've already looked at all the resumes. Again, I can click in and see more information about each student. But let's just do our invitations today. I'll invite Courtney. I'll invite Brian. There's the concept of alternates too, and you can see this is assigning a room to each student based on the job they've chosen. I meant to mention this earlier, so bear with me. Sorry about that. I want to go back to the multiple job visit for a moment. The employer typically is the one choosing this, but it's on the admin interface as well, whereby you can say, I want the associates for the summer, my interns, I want them to be on interview schedule 1, and I want my finance people to be on schedule 2. So based on the job that the student applies for, they'll be assigned to a default room. Now you can change that student by student if you want to, but you can see by default it's tagging them for a particular room. I'm going to make Gilbert an alternate here. And you might ask, what's an alternate? I'm going to invite a couple more people as I talk. But you can say, well, the alternates, you know, I've only got so many interviews and I've got a lot more applicants. I really like these 10 students for my 10 interviews. I'm going to invite them. But these 3 other students are really close also. I'm going to tag them as alternates. And that way, if one of the invited students declines for some reason to interview, one of my alternates will get automatically promoted. Okay, so the employer is taking that action. The employer typically has the ability to finalize their invitations as well. Now, in this case, I can't because the student application period is not over yet. The employer cannot finalize the invites until the application period for students is done, but normally there's a finalize icon up there for the employer. What does finalize invitations mean? It means I'm done making my selections. I'm going to finalize, which sends the emails out to the students. Courtney would get the congratulations, you've been invited to interview with Toyota. Gilbert would get the congratulations, you've been selected as an alternate to interview. Your alternate rank is number 1. And then you can see here, you know, Alexis might be alternate 2. The employers can rank them. And then the last student here, Corey, would get, thank you for applying, but sorry you were not invited. You know, whatever those email templates say in your configuration, you can control the wording, obviously. Those 3 emails would go out when the employer finalizes the invitations. Now, in your administrative view, obviously you have all of that same functionality. You know, through the application process when students are applying, you can see all the students that are applying. You can see their resumes and cover letters. You can remove somebody manually. Again, the deadlines don't matter to you. You can add a student after the deadline. Which job? Oh, I'm adding a student for the finance division. This student came into my office very upset and concerned because they missed the deadline. Well, you can go ahead and add Greg here manually. You've got full control administratively, right? So which resume and cover letter do you want to use for Greg? You can do anything that either the employers or the students can do. So there's the application list. You can see what the employer's doing here in terms of inviting. There's an invite list tab, Not yet finalized, but you know, again, you can keep an eye on them and see what they're doing. If they forgot to finalize and they show up on that delinquent report, you can finalize for them. I won't do this now, but just again, so you can see it. The finalization not only sends the emails out to all the students that I described, but it also prevents the recruiter from making any additional changes to the list. You, administratively, after finalization, you can still make changes. But that also gives you the opportunity if the employer says, oh, I didn't really mean to invite Brian, my apologies. I mean, you could at least change that status for Brian and send Brian or call Brian and let him know that a mistake was made. So you've got full control again over the process. Once everything is finalized, again, as long as the dates are in line, the student would have the ability to go in and start picking times. So I am going to go ahead, and I will just finalize this. This should just take a second. System sending out the mail now, locking the recruiter out from making any more changes and altering the student's status. And you can see alternates are automatically accepted. It's kind of strange that didn't make, oh, they're two different jobs. That's why they're both alternate ones. Sorry, that threw me for a second. Each job posting has its own alternate list. So if somebody for the finance job were to withdraw, then Alexis would be the first person promoted up to invited status. As the rest of these students log in and pick their times, you know, then their status changes. So let's log in and let's sort of close the loop here now. Let's be Courtney again. Let's get logged in as her. And see what we have. A couple of things worth noting here as we get to the interviews page. I guess I didn't click that, sorry. So we can see, again, all of Courtney's activity here. Here's her 3 invitations where she's been selected to interview. She's already on a couple of schedules. And there we go. Now, again, maybe these dates aren't right. Let's see if it's going to let me pick a time. No, sorry, the dates aren't right. I didn't set this visit up correctly. Okay, that's right. We had left it open so that she could apply to this one, so it's not ready for her to pick a time. But let's go back to one where she's already got a time. I want to show you what this looks like. Here's one where she's on a J&J schedule, Johnson & Johnson. You can see I can come in, I can see I could change my resume, etc. There's a couple of places where she could come in and cancel her interview or swap times. It's either there or there. Either way is fine. But if she chooses to come in, she can see what time she has. She could pick any of these other available times. And then if there were other students on the schedule, she could just issue a swap request with a button that says, you know, swap times. I want to see if I can find a better one to show you the swap interface. Sorry about that. Here's one. So again, on this interview with Johnson & Johnson, there are a handful of open times. If none of those work for her, she can come in and see the schedule and the other students on the schedule. You can see I've already requested a couple of other swaps here. I've asked John if I could have the 115. I've asked Prasad if I could have the 240. So you can see I've already requested those. I could certainly ask Chris if I could trade for the 2 o'clock. So what does a swap request do? Each of those 3 students received an email from the system that says, Courtney would like to trade with you. She has the whatever time, 9 a.m. slot, and she would like to trade with you for the 115. John gets that email. He has the ability to log into the system and take an action. He can either accept that swap or decline that swap. If he declines it, nothing else happens. If he accepts it, that sends an email to Courtney saying that John accepted your swap. The 2 times are traded in the system. Chris and Prasad would both receive another email that says, the swap has been withdrawn from Courtney. So they wouldn't have to take any further action. It automatically withdraws the other swaps. So it's a pretty robust system for swapping. Again, it sort of keeps you as the staff person out of the middle. There's great email templates for every step of the way around swapping. So that's a module if you're not using it, and if you find yourself sort of getting inundated with last-minute changes and change requests from students, you should get the swapping turned on. Really, the last thing I wanted to show you before we look at a couple of the exceptions is the ability to print schedules. And it's pretty much the same for both employers and for administrators. So let's go back to our on-campus interview visit. And I'm going to go find that Johnson & Johnson one because it had a lot of students on the schedule. Don't remember the date. Do you remember, Tammy? There it is. Yep. So when you're on the interviews tab, this is where, sort of you're in the home stretch now, right? The interview's in a couple of days on the 21st. You can see the time slots that the students are picking. You've got a ton of functionality here to view schedules, adjust schedules. Again, you can see the student, you can see the resumes, you can see their time slots. You've got the ability still to remove somebody. You can manually slot somebody into an open time slot. Even the day before the interview, the day of the interview, you have this capability. You could block a slot so that no other student chooses that slot. Lots of functionality here, including a swap, so that you can move somebody from one time slot to another. So you could trade them to an available slot. You could swap them with somebody else. You've got lots of capability there for just managing things beyond all of the various deadlines. In terms of printing schedules, again, these are all just going to generate PDFs with an actual printed schedule. Would have your school name and logo on there, a list of the students and times, plus all of the resumes sorted in the orders of the time slot. So these are fairly sizable PDFs. You can see in this case it's 16 pages, and it looks like we don't have a good logo here on the demo site, but I think you get the idea. It's going to print a nice schedule. You could hand this to the employer, right, with a packet of resumes in the order that the students are coming in the room. So off you go with the schedule print. And employers have that same capability as well. Okay, I know that's a lot of material to cover in 50 minutes. I want to show you just a couple of things on slides, and then I see we've got some questions in the chat window, which is very good. We will switch to that in just a moment. But let me get back to the PowerPoint here. I want to just spend 2 minutes talking about some other options that you may or may not be aware of. The first is bid interviews. We've got, I don't know, 10 or 12 schools doing bid interview processes on campus. So if you have a bid process where students who were not selected by the employer to interview want to come interview, bidding is the way to do it, or first come, first serve. You see the last little bullet point on the left there. First come, first serve are simply open slots with no bidding. It allows, again, let's say the employer had 20 interview slots, but they only invited 16 students to interview, but they want to go ahead and fill up their schedule. If there are 4 other students on campus that match the screening criteria for the interview, they can just come in and pick from the available times. It's first come, first serve. So that option is available. Bidding is a little more involved. It would be all of the students who did not get invited to interview, having a bid point system in place where the people with the highest bids win the right to be on that schedule. A handful of MBA schools use it. I've heard of the bid process at undergraduate schools as well. So when you get the bidding turned on, you can see there's a couple of additional dates there that control when can students bid. There's some additional fields. You see the control fields there, how many open slots versus closed. Closed means the employer is going to invite or pre-select. Open means they're open, first come, first serve, or bid. And then you can see some stats there down that right column about the bidding. There's an extra tab for managing the bids. You can see I've tried to hide some student names here. I had to look at a real school site for this because it's not in the demo site, but you can see who's the student who's bidding, what resume did they submit with their bid. You can manually add people, remove people, and so forth, manually edit bids. You can see one student has withdrawn their bid. So you've got a full management of the bid process there. And then finally, when you get over to that Interviews tab where students are on schedules, you can see, oh, this was an invited or closed student. This was an open student who bid or came in via first come, first serve. And now you've got two wait lists to deal with. You've got the alternate wait list that the employer designated as their alternates for the invitation slots, as well as people on the open wait list for the bid or first come, first serve slots. Now, to use the bidding, you have to use the automated scheduler, which is the next thing I want to talk about. It is eliminating the race, if you will. Students don't have to come in and log in and pick a time slot. It's not a race to get the best interview slot. Students are just invited, and then they simply wait for the schedule to fill, and they're going to get placed in a time slot by the system based on their own availability. Their own availability is determined by what the system knows. Do they have other interviews on that date? Do they have an advising appointment or a workshop signed up for on that date? Anything the system knows about, it will try to avoid that conflict for them. And there's also a page called OCR availability, you see it there, where students can block out certain interview times based on their class schedule, work schedule, what have you. So they can make themselves unavailable for on-campus interviews at certain times. I won't go into this in depth because of time constraints, but the system uses something called the most happy people logic, which basically means if there's 20 students getting interviewed, the system will run many iterations of the schedule trying to minimize the conflicts. It's trying to get to zero. As soon as it gets a zero conflict schedule, it stops running. But in some cases where it's very busy weeks for students, it's just impossible to avoid all the conflicts. It will schedule the conflicts, and you can see there, it logs all of the activity in great depth on your activity tab in the visit record. And there are specific email templates that tell the student if they get placed on a schedule with a conflict, it lets them know in no uncertain terms that they need to probably swap or do something about that conflict. So that's the automated scheduler. I'm sorry I've talked a lot. We're down to 6 or 7 minutes for questions here, but let's address the questions. So the first question we had was, can you delete a confirmed request? The answer is yes. You can get rid of, well, the request is the request, right? Once it gets confirmed, it has created an event or it has created an interview visit. So what you really want to get rid of is the interview visit record. And you can do that. Let me get back to my browser. You can do this by simply, on the main tab of the visit, you simply cancel the interview visit. You could delete it if nothing had happened to it. Canceling is recommended because, number one, the canceled visits stay in the view of the students. So if they had applied to something or they had looked at something and marked it as a favorite, or they were at least just interested, it lets them know, like, hey, you weren't seeing things. This thing really was here, but now it's canceled. So cancel is the recommended way. The request, once it's confirmed, I don't know if you can delete that or not, and I don't really know if you want to. I think it's good to have that track record of, oh, we confirmed this request, but then we had to later cancel the interview visit or the event. Next is, can you make it so an employer can only select from certain positions? For example, if we have an employer who posts regularly, can we make it so they can only select from certain date or status of a job? At this point, the answer to that is no. If the employer has 16 job postings in the system, plus 4 other jobs that they used for on-campus interviews last fall, you know, they're going to be able to select from any of their jobs and connect that to an on-campus interview record. Now, again, you're ultimately the administrator and you have control, so you can remove and change things as needed. Next, can you show us an example of a multi-job, multi-schedule, 2 different days and how a student can register? Yeah, and in fact, I think I did without mentioning it. Let's go back to the Toyota one, because that is now multi-job. There it is. So it's multi-job and multi-day. And when I was signed in as the student, Courtney, I applied to one of these jobs, I think the finance job, And, I didn't really know any different. I didn't know at that point that it was 2 different days. I saw the 2 jobs. I applied to the finance job. When I get invited, it's just going to tell me, hey, you're invited to interview on whatever date, the 19th, right? And so at that point, it's just going to be a single day in my mind as a student. I won't have to worry about the fact that there are some other students interviewing on the 18th with Toyota. The next logical question then is how can you do this if there are 2 jobs for each of those days? And again, I think the example just sort of extends itself out, where if there were 4 jobs here, I could have 3 of those jobs all going to Schedule 2 on the 19th. And again, the student will only see what's relevant to their application, what's relevant to their invitation. There is another question, can you convert a job that is already posted into an OCI or link to it somehow? And the answer is yes to both. So if I go to a certain job posting, let's get to the job file here, I'll just pick one here, 20th Century Fox. If the 20th Century Fox then contacts you and says, hey, I want to come on campus after all, I've already posted this job, and maybe there's even already 3 students that applied to this job, there is a convert to OCI or OCR function here. As soon as this job posting loads, I think the demo site's getting as tired as my voice. There it is, convert to OCR. So all you do is you really just click that link, you tell it what date, and so you can do flat-out conversion from the job posting, and that will create a brand new on-campus interview visit record that you would have to complete, much as if you were confirming an employer request. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it was if 20th Century Fox already had an interview visit. I don't think they do, but if they did, let's just use Toyota again here as an example. You can just go into the Jobs tab, and the employer can do this as well. There's another permission here where you can copy, and there's another one called attach. I've seen employers attach the posting to the visit, where it will just move the job from a posting to an on-campus interview visit and bring the applicants along with it. We've hit the end of the questions in our chat window. We'll give everybody a couple minutes more if you want to type something in, but I know we're up at the top of the hour, so we certainly, for those of you that have to leave, we thank you for your time. I know we're closing in on the holidays, and so we appreciate your time. Hopefully this was helpful, and we will have this recorded. And Tammy, where do we post that on the support portal?
We do that as well, as all attendees will get an email linking them to the webinar if you'd like to view it. And just a couple of reminders, we do have the school partner support portal that has guides and videos, templates, and this webinar as well. Also information in the knowledge base. If you have any questions following this, if you're currently using our OCI module, feel free to send that question into the support team at support@gradleaders.com, or you can chat with them. If you are working with a CRM, feel free to contact them. Or you can even contact myself, Tammy Scott, tscott@gradleaders.com. If you're not currently using it and you're interested in learning more, and possibly implementing OCR into your system, then again, you can contact any of us, and we will get you all the information that you need. Also, wanted to just real quickly remind you that we do best practice webinars every month. Generally, the second Thursday of the month at noon. Our next one is going to be on January 10th. It's going to highlight how to plan and host a successful event or workshop. And that one is going to be, our trainers will be Ellie Ringler and Matt Hall, who I'm sure many of you have worked with. There is a link in the partner support portal to go ahead and get a reservation for that next webinar if you'd like. Plus there'll be emails. I believe we've already sent out one invitation. There'll be others that will be coming to you. Anything else over there, Dave?
The last thing we got was a handful of thank yous into the chat window, and certainly thank you all as well. Again, best wishes for the holidays. Hopefully everybody gets a nice break here at the end of the year, and I'm sure we'll be talking to all of you real soon.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Have a great holiday.
Thank you.